The flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the cramped control room, painting a macabre tableau on the sweat-streaked faces of the remaining crew. Outside, the storm raged, a furious tempest of cosmic proportions that threatened to tear their small vessel apart. Inside, the tension was just as volatile. Alistair, his eyes bloodshot and his hands trembling, stared at the flickering console, its screens displaying a chaotic jumble of alien symbols and rapidly declining energy readings. "We're losing her," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper above the howling wind that seemed to claw at the hull. "The shields are almost gone." Beside him, Dr. Eris, her normally composed face etched with worry, nodded grimly. "I know. The electromagnetic pulse. It's unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's like they knew exactly where we were, exactly how to cripple us. They." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. They, the HFY? The enigmatic alien race that had, until recently, been nothing more than a whisper in the back corridors of xenolinguistics departments, a theoretical threat relegated to dusty academic papers. Now, they were a terrifying reality. Just weeks ago, the Odyssey, a state-of-the-art exploration vessel, had embarked on its maiden voyage, a mission to chart the uncharted territories beyond the known galaxy. Their primary objective, to make first contact with any sentient life they encountered. Alistair, the ship's seasoned captain, had envisioned a peaceful exchange, a meeting of minds that would usher in a new era of intergalactic understanding. Dr. Eris, a brilliant xenobiologist, dreamed of unlocking the secrets of alien physiology and culture. Neither of them, nor any of the crew, could have imagined the nightmare that awaited them. Their first encounter with the HFY had been brief, almost anticlimactic. A sleek, obsidian ship, shaped like a predatory bird, had appeared on their sensors, silently shadowing them for days. Then, without warning, it had vanished. They had breathed a collective sigh of relief, assuming the encounter was over. They were wrong. Terribly wrong. The HFY returned, not with a diplomatic envoy, but with a devastating electromagnetic pulse that crippled the Odyssey, leaving it adrift in the swirling chaos of a nebula. And then, the boarding parties came. Tall, imposing figures, clad in bio-armor that shimmered like liquid night, they moved with an unnerving grace, their faces hidden behind featureless masks. They hadn't spoken, hadn't communicated in any way that the crew could understand. They simply took. They took crew members, one by one, disappearing with them into the labyrinthine corridors of their ship. Alistair had tried to fight, of course. He was a captain, after all. His duty was to protect his crew. But the HFY were too strong, too fast. Their weapons, unlike anything he had ever seen, emitted a silent energy that could incapacitate without leaving a mark. He had watched, helpless, as his crew was led away, their screams echoing through the ship before abruptly falling silent. Now only a handful remained, huddled in the control room, desperately trying to restore the ship's systems, to send a distress signal, to do anything, anything at all, to escape the clutches of the HFY. But a growing sense of dread gnawed at Alistair's heart. He knew deep down that this wasn't just a simple abduction. There was something else, something far more sinister at play. The way the HFY had looked at them, not with hostility, but with curiosity. No, not curiosity. Something colder, more calculating. Something that made the blood run cold. He glanced at Dr. Eris, who was frantically typing at the console, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Anything?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She shook her head. "The damage is too extensive. We're cut off. And I've been analyzing the HFY's communication signals. They're not like anything we've ever encountered before. It's not a language, not in the traditional sense. It's biological." "Biological?" Alistair frowned. "What do you mean?" Dr. Eris hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards the viewport, as if she expected the KRYL to burst in at any moment. I think it's some kind of pheromonal communication. They're communicating through scent, through chemical signals. And then I think I've deciphered part of it. Alistair leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. What did you find? Dr. Eris took a deep breath. It's disturbing. They're talking about breeding. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. Alistair felt a chill run down his spine. Breeding? What do you mean, breeding? Dr. Eris's voice trembled. I think they're looking for compatible genetic material. They're looking for a prime breeder. Alistair stared at her, his mind reeling. A prime breeder? You mean they're looking for someone to breed with? Dr. Eris nodded slowly. I'm afraid so. And then I think I know why they took the crew members they did. Alistair's blood ran cold. Why? Dr. Eris's voice was barely a whisper. Because, according to their signals, they've chosen a human male. Alistair felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He knew what that meant. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was the human male they had chosen. He was the prime breeder. The emergency lights flickered again, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. A low hum resonated through the ship, a sound that Alistair recognized with growing horror. It was the sound of the KRYL transport beam charging. They were coming for him. He looked at Dr. Eris, his eyes filled with terror and a desperate plea for help. But she could only shake her head, her face pale and drawn. There was nothing she could do. The door to the control room hissed open, and 2 KRYL warriors entered, their bio-armor shimmering in the dim light. They moved with their unnerving grace, their masked faces expressionless. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound. They simply gestured towards Alistair. He knew what he had to do. He had to go with them. He had to face whatever horrors awaited him. He was the prime breeder. He was their chosen one. He was there. Sacrifice.as he walked towards the KRYL warriors. A single thought echoed in his mind: what kind of future awaited him? What kind of twisted, alien rituals would he be subjected to? And what would become of the human race if these alien queens succeeded in their horrifying plan? He didn't know. All he knew was that his life, and perhaps the fate of humanity, was about to change forever. He stepped through the doorway, into the unknown, leaving Dr. Eris alone in the flickering light, her face a mask of despair. The door hissed shut behind him, leaving her in the deafening silence, broken only by the howling storm outside. What would happen next? The answer, like the vast, unexplored reaches of space, was terrifyingly uncertain. The chill of the KRYL ship was immediate, a stark contrast to the familiar, if damaged, environment of the Odyssey. Alistair felt it seep into his bones, a coldness that wasn't just physical, but something deeper, something that spoke of the alien nature of his captors. The corridor he was led down was sleek and dark, the walls smooth and seamless, pulsing with a faint, internal light. There were no visible doors, no apparent controls, just the smooth, curving walls and the silent KRYL warriors flanking him. He tried to observe his surroundings, to glean any information that might help him understand what was happening, but the ship seemed to be designed to offer no clues. It was a maze of smooth surfaces and subtle shadows, a place that felt both technologically advanced and strangely organic. The KRYL warriors, despite their imposing size and bio-armor, moved with an almost unsettling stillness. They didn't speak, didn't even make eye contact. They simply guided him forward, their touch light but firm, their presence radiating an aura of quiet power. Alistair felt a growing sense of helplessness. He was a captain, a leader, a man used to being in control. But here, on this alien ship, he was nothing more than a prisoner, a specimen. They reached a large, circular chamber. The walls here pulsed with a brighter light, revealing intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change before his eyes. In the center of the chamber, a raised platform glowed with a soft, blue luminescence. Alistair was led onto the platform, and as he stepped into the light, he felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the air itself was charged with energy. He looked around, trying to understand what was happening, but the HFY warriors remained silent, their masked faces impassive. Then, the platform began to rise. Slowly, smoothly it ascended, carrying Alistair upwards towards the ceiling of the chamber. As he rose, he saw that the walls were covered with more of the shifting patterns that now seemed to form recognizable shapes. He saw images of stars, of planets, of swirling nebulae. He saw images of strange, alien creatures, some vaguely familiar, others utterly unlike anything he had ever seen. And then, he saw images of humans. Not just any humans. He saw images of men, strong and healthy, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that looked like awe. They were being presented to someone. Someone he couldn't see. The platform stopped, hovering just below the ceiling. Alistair looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. Above him, suspended in the center of the chamber, was a massive, crystalline structure. It pulsed with the same blue light as the platform, and within its depths, he could see figures. They were tall and slender, their forms vaguely humanoid, but their features were obscured by the shimmering crystal. Alistair could make out long, flowing limbs, and heads that seemed to be crowned with delicate, antenna-like structures. They radiated an aura of power, of ancient wisdom, of something alien. These were the HFY queens. A wave of fear washed over Alistair. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that these were the beings who had orchestrated his capture. These were the beings who had chosen him as their prime breeder. The crystalline structure began to descend, slowly, gracefully, until it was just above him. Alistair could now see the HFY queens more clearly. Their forms were even more ethereal than he had initially thought. Their skin shimmered like polished silver, and their eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed with an inner light. They didn't speak, but Alistair could feel their presence, their thoughts, their intentions, pressing against his mind. He felt a sense of awe, mixed with terror, a feeling that he was in the presence of something ancient, something powerful, something beyond human comprehension. One of the queens extended a long, slender hand towards him. Her touch, when it came, was surprisingly gentle. She touched his forehead, and a surge of energy flowed through him, filling his mind with images, with sensations, with knowledge. He saw visions of HFY society, of their history, of their culture. He saw their reverence for life, their deep connection to the universe, their intricate understanding of genetics. He saw their desperate need for a prime breeder, a being whose genetic makeup was compatible with their own, a being who could ensure the survival of their race. The queen withdrew her hand, and the images faded. Alistair was left reeling, his mind overwhelmed by the information he had received. He understood now. He understood why he had been chosen. He understood the gravity of his situation. He was not just a prisoner. He was a vital part of their future. The queen turned her attention to the HFY warriors, and with a gesture, she communicated her instructions. The warriors nodded and moved to the edge of the platform. Alistair watched as the platform began to descend once more, carrying him back down towards the floor of the chamber. As he reached the bottom, the warriors approached him again, their masked faces still impassive. They gestured for him to follow them. Alistair hesitated. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew he had no choice. He was in their hands now. His fate, and perhaps the fate of humanity, was intertwined with theirs. He took a deep breath and followed the HFY warriors out of the chamber, into the unknown depths of the HFY ship. The journey through the ship was long and disorienting. Alistair was led through countless corridors, past chambers filled with strange and alien technology, past glimpses of other KRYL beings, going about their daily lives. He saw KRYL scientists working with complex machinery, KRYL warriors training in combat simulations, KRYL civilians tending to what appeared to be vast hydroponic gardens. The ship was a living, breathing entity, a testament to the advanced civilization that had created it. Finally, they reached their destination. A large, ornate chamber, decorated with intricate carvings and shimmering crystals. In the center of the chamber, a raised dais was covered with soft, plush material. Alistair was led onto the dais, and the KRYL warriors left him there, alone. He looked around the chamber, trying to understand its purpose. It felt ceremonial. He wondered if this was where the breeding rituals would take place. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. A door at the far end of the chamber opened, and a KRYL being entered. This being was different from the warriors he had encountered. It was smaller, more slender, and it wore a long, flowing robe. Its movements were graceful and fluid, and its presence radiated an aura of intelligence and compassion. Alistair realized that this must be a KRYL priestess, or perhaps a scientist specializing in genetics. The KRYL being approached him, and with a gentle gesture, it indicated that he should lie down on the dais. Alistair hesitated for a moment, then complied. He lay down on the soft material, his heart pounding in his chest. The KRYL being began to perform some kind of ritual. It moved its hands over his body, chanting in a soft, melodic voice. Alistair felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He felt his fear receding, replaced by a sense of acceptance. The ritual continued for what seemed like hours. Alistair lay there, his mind open, his body relaxed. He felt as if he was being prepared, not for some horrific ordeal, but for something sacred. Finally, the KRYL being stopped chanting. It looked at Alistair, its eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. Then, it turned and left the chamber. Alistair lay there, alone once more. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew that whatever it was, he was ready. He had accepted his fate. He was the prime breeder. He was the chosen one. He was theirs. The door to the chamber opened again, and this time, it was the KRYL queens who entered. They moved with their usual grace and power, their presence filling the chamber with an aura of majesty. They approached the dais, their eyes fixed on Alistair. Alistair looked at them, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was it. The moment had come. He was about to fulfill his purpose. He was about to become a part of their future. The queens reached the dais and stood around him, their hands outstretched. They touched him, their touch sending a surge of energy through his body. He felt a connection to them, a bond that transcended language, that transcended species. He felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. He was no longer just Alistair, the human captain. He was Alistair, the prime breeder, the chosen one, the father of a new generation. The queens began to chant, their voices resonating through the chamber, filling it with a powerful, otherworldly energy. Alistair closed his eyes, surrendering himself to the moment, to the ritual, to the KRYL queens. He was theirs. The chanting intensified, the vibrations resonating through Alistair's very bones. He felt a strange warmth spreading through his body, a sensation that was both comforting and unsettling. The queen's touch grew firmer, their energy intertwining with his, creating a bond that felt both ancient and utterly alien. He saw flashes of images of KRYL young, vibrant and full of life, of a thriving KRYL civilization, expanding across the galaxy, of himself, not as a prisoner, but as a revered figure, a vital part of their society. These visions, implanted in his mind, were not forceful or threatening. They were presented as a possibility, a potential future, contingent on his cooperation, his acceptance. But amidst the awe and the implanted visions, a flicker of doubt remained. Alistair remembered his crew, the faces of his friends and colleagues, the fear in their eyes as they were taken. He remembered the Odyssey, adrift and crippled, its mission abandoned. He remembered Earth, his home, the people he had sworn to protect. Was this future, this promise of integration into HFY society, worth the cost? Was it right to sacrifice his own kind, to become a tool for an alien race, no matter how advanced or seemingly benevolent? The chanting reached a crescendo, the energy in the chamber crackling and sparking. Alistair's body began to convulse, his muscles contracting and relaxing involuntarily. He felt as if he was being pulled apart, his very DNA being rewritten, reshaped, molded into something new. He cried out, a soundless scream lost in the rising tide of the HFY ritual. Suddenly, the visions shifted. The idyllic images of HFY prosperity were replaced by scenes of conflict, of internal strife, of a society teetering on the brink of collapse. He saw the HFY queens, not as benevolent rulers, but as desperate survivors, clinging to a fading legacy. He saw the true reason for their desperate search for a prime breeder, not to enhance their race, but to save it from extinction. They weren't looking for a partner, they were looking for a savior, a genetic miracle worker. And he, Alistair, was the chosen one. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't being offered a place in their society, he was being used, manipulated, coerced into becoming a biological tool. The warmth he had felt turned to ice, the awe to disgust. He was not a willing participant in this ritual, he was a prisoner, a pawn in their desperate game. The chanting reached its peak, the chamber filled with an almost blinding light. Alistair felt a searing pain, as if his very soul was being torn from his body. He fought back, a surge of defiance rising within him. He would not be their savior. He would not be their tool. He would not sacrifice his own kind for their survival. He focused his will, his mind, his very being, against the overwhelming power of the HFY ritual. He remembered his training, the mental discipline he had honed as a captain, the strength he had learned to cultivate in the face of danger. He pushed back against the alien influence, fighting for control of his own body, his own mind, his own destiny. The queens sensed his resistance. Their chanting faltered, their touch became less certain. They looked at him, their eyes no longer filled with reverence, but with something else. Something that looked like anger. The light in the chamber began to flicker, the crystalline structures pulsing erratically. The energy that had filled the room began to dissipate, leaving behind a chilling void. Alistair felt the connection to the queens weaken, their influence receding. He was regaining control, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they unleashed their full power. He had to act, and he had to act now. He remembered the stories he had heard about HFY physiology, their vulnerability to certain frequencies of energy. He remembered Dr. Eris's research, her theories about their pheromonal communication, their biological makeup. He didn't know if it would work, but it was his only chance. He focused his mind, channeling all his remaining strength, all his will, into a single, desperate act. He tried to mimic the electromagnetic pulse that had crippled the Odyssey, the pulse that had allowed the HFY to capture him in the first place. He tried to replicate it, to amplify it, to turn it against them. It was a gamble, a desperate, last-ditch effort. He was a human, untrained in alien technology, trying to wield a weapon he barely understood. But he had nothing to lose. His life, his freedom, the future of his species, all hung in the balance. He unleashed the energy, a raw, untamed burst of power that ripped through the chamber, disrupting the HFY ritual, shattering the crystalline structures, and sending the queens reeling. The chamber plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flickering consoles on the walls. Alistair collapsed to the dais, his body drained, his mind exhausted. He had done it. He had fought back. He had defied the HFY queens. But the fight wasn't over. He could feel their presence, their anger, their thirst for revenge. They would not give up easily. They would come for him. And when they did, he would have to be ready. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He had a feeling that what would happen next would determine the future of humanity. The darkness in the chamber was thick, punctuated only by the sporadic flashes of emergency lights. Alistair lay on the dais, his breath ragged, his body trembling. He had disrupted the ritual, he had pushed back against the HFY queens, but the effort had taken its toll. He felt weak, vulnerable, exposed. He knew they would be coming for him. He just didn't know when, or how. He tried to gather his strength, to prepare himself for the inevitable confrontation. He knew he couldn't stay here. This chamber, this dais, it was a trap. He had to find a way out, a way to escape the HFY ship, a way to warn Earth about the threat they posed. But he was alone, unarmed, and deep within the bowels of an alien vessel. His chances of survival were slim. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small panel on the side of the dais, hidden beneath a fold of the plush material. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. It felt like a release mechanism, a hidden switch. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed it. A soft click echoed through the chamber, and a section of the dais slid open, revealing a narrow passageway. It was dark, barely wide enough for him to crawl through, but it was a way out. Alistair didn't hesitate. He crawled into the passageway, the metal door closing silently behind him. He found himself in a narrow tunnel, the walls smooth and cold. He moved forward, guided by the faint glow of the emergency lights. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the ship. He had no idea where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving. He had to escape. As he crawled through the tunnel, he heard a sound. A faint, rhythmic pulsing, growing louder with each passing moment. He stopped, listening intently. It sounded like a heartbeat. A large, powerful heartbeat. He continued on, following the sound. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, a vast cavern filled with strange, organic machinery. The pulsing sound was deafening here, resonating through the very structure of the ship. And in the center of the chamber, he saw it. A massive, pulsating organ, suspended from the ceiling by thick, tendril-like structures. It glowed with an eerie, internal light, and its surface was covered with intricate veins and capillaries. It was alive. It was the heart of the HFY ship. Alistair stared at it, mesmerized and horrified. He realized now why the ship felt so organic, so alive. It was because it was. The HFY ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a living being, a symbiotic extension of the HFY race. And then, he saw something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Attached to the pulsating organ, connected by a network of tubes and wires, were humans. Not the crew members he had seen taken earlier. These were different. They were younger, smaller, their bodies altered. They were connected to the organ, their life force being drained to power the ship, to sustain the HFY queens. They were being used as biological batteries, their bodies twisted and transformed into fuel for the HFY war machine. Alistair felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had known the HFY were using humans, but he hadn't imagined the extent of their depravity. They weren't just breeding with humans, they were harvesting them, exploiting them, turning them into living fuel cells. As he watched, one of the humans stirred. A young boy, no more than 10 years old, opened his eyes. He looked at Alistair, his face filled with a mixture of fear and despair. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He could only look at Alistair, his eyes pleading for help. Alistair knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave these people here, to suffer this horrific fate. He had to save them, even if it meant risking his own life. But how? He was just one man, facing an entire alien race. He had no weapons, no allies, no hope. He was just a human, trapped in the heart of an alien ship, surrounded by unimaginable horrors. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him. The hiss of a door opening. He turned around, and his heart sank. The KRYL queens had found him. They stood in the doorway, their masked faces expressionless, their eyes glowing with cold fury. They had seen him. They knew what he had discovered. And they would not let him leave. Alistair knew he was trapped. He was caught between the KRYL queens and the human captives, between his desire to escape and his duty to save the innocent. He was facing an impossible choice. But then, he noticed something. One of the queens was different. She seemed hesitant. She wasn't looking at him with anger, but with something else. Something that looked like regret? Or perhaps understanding? Alistair looked closer, trying to decipher her expression. And then, he saw it. A flicker of recognition in her eyes. A sign that she knew him. That she remembered him. That she understood. And then, she did something that shocked him. She raised her hand, not in a gesture of attack, but in a gesture of peace? Or perhaps an invitation? She gestured towards the other queens, then towards Alistair, then towards the human captives. She seemed to be trying to communicate something, something that he couldn't understand. But then he saw it. A faint image flashed in his mind, a vision of the future. A vision of a different future, a future where humans and KRYL coexisted, not as masters and slaves, but as partners. A future where the KRYL queens, not as ruthless conquerors, but as wise and benevolent leaders. A future where he, Alistair, played a different role, not as a prime breeder, but as a bridge. The queen extended her hand towards him, her eyes pleading. She was offering him a choice. A choice between two futures. A choice that would determine the fate of both humans and KRYL. A choice that he had to make now. But which future would he choose? The answer, like the vast, unexplored reaches of space, was terrifyingly uncertain. Alistair stared at the queen's outstretched hand, his mind reeling. The vision she had shown him was tantalizing, a glimpse of a future where humans and KRYL weren't locked in a struggle for survival, but united in a shared destiny. It was a future worth fighting for, a future he desperately wanted to believe in. But could he trust her? Could he trust any of them? They had deceived him, manipulated him, used his people as fuel for their war machine. How could he possibly believe that they were now offering him a genuine chance for peace? He looked at the other queens, their faces still impassive, their eyes radiating a cold intensity. He looked at the human captives, their bodies broken, their spirits crushed. He looked at the young boy who had tried to speak to him, his eyes still pleading for help. Alistair knew he couldn't make this decision based on blind faith. He had to be sure. He had to know if this offer of peace was real, or just another manipulation. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind, trying to connect with the queen who had shown him the vision. He reached out with his own mind, tentatively, carefully, trying to bridge the gap between their species. He felt a resistance, a barrier, but he pushed through, driven by a desperate hope. And then, he saw it. The truth. Not the idealized vision she had shown him, but the reality behind it. He saw the queen's motives, her fears, her desperation. He saw that she was different from the other queens, that she had a genuine desire for peace, a belief that humans and KRYL could coexist. But he also saw the truth about the other queens. They didn't share her vision. They saw humans as nothing more than a resource, a means to an end. They would use him, use the human captives, use any means necessary to ensure their own survival, regardless of the cost. The queen who had shown him the vision knew this. She knew that the other queens would never agree to true peace, that they would always seek to dominate, to exploit. She had shown him the vision not as a promise, but as a plea. A plea for help. She needed him, Alistair, to help her change things, to help her bring about the future she believed in. Alistair understood now. The Queen wasn't offering him a place in their society, she was offering him a chance to change it. A chance to fight for true peace, not just for humans, but for all species. He looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. He nodded. He took her hand, and as he did, he felt a surge of energy pass between them. A connection was forged, a bond that transcended species, a shared purpose. The Queen turned to the other queens, her eyes blazing with a newfound determination. She spoke to them, her voice resonating through the chamber, her words filled with power and conviction. Alistair didn't understand the language, but he understood the message. She was challenging them, confronting them, exposing their true intentions. She was fighting for the future she believed in, and she was asking him to fight with her. The other queens reacted with fury. They lunged at her, their eyes glowing with rage. The chamber erupted in chaos, the HFY queens battling amongst themselves, their bio-armor clashing, their energy weapons firing. Alistair found himself caught in the middle of the conflict, but he didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. He had to help the Queen who had shown him the vision, the Queen who believed in peace. He used his knowledge of the ship's systems, his understanding of HFY physiology, to disrupt their attacks, to create openings for her. The battle raged, the fate of the HFY race, and perhaps humanity, hanging in the balance. And then, in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. The young boy who had tried to speak to Alistair, the one who had been connected to the ship's organ, suddenly broke free. He wasn't strong, he wasn't armed, but he had something the HFY queens didn't have, a connection to the ship itself. He used that connection, that link to the living heart of the vessel, to disrupt its systems, to overload its energy core. The ship began to shake, alarms blaring, lights flickering. The HFY queens, weakened by the internal disruption, faltered in their battle. The Queen who had shown Alistair the vision saw her opportunity. She unleashed a powerful blast of energy, striking down the other queens, one by one. They fell, their bodies dissolving into dust. The battle was over. The Queen who believed in peace had won. The ship, damaged and unstable, began to drift through space, its course uncertain. Alistair knew he had to leave, to return to the Odyssey, to warn Earth about what had happened. But he also knew that he would never forget what he had seen, what he had learned. He had seen the potential for peace, the possibility of a future where humans and HFY could coexist. And he knew that he had a role to play in making that future a reality. He looked at the Queen, her eyes filled with gratitude. He knew that their journey together was far from over. They had a long way to go, a lot to overcome. But they had taken the first step. They had chosen peace. As Alistair made his way back to the escape pod, a final thought crossed his mind. The Queen had won, but at what cost? She had eliminated the other queens, the leaders of her race. She was now alone, the sole ruler of a dying empire. How would she rebuild? How would she lead her people? And what would become of the human captives, now that they were no longer needed as fuel? The future was uncertain, filled with both hope and danger. But one thing was clear, the story was far from over. This was not the end. This was just the beginning. The escape pod shuddered as it detached from the HFY ship, leaving the massive, damaged vessel drifting silently in the vast expanse of space. Alistair watched it recede, a mixture of awe and apprehension swirling within him. He had escaped, he had survived, but the experience had changed him. He was no longer just a captain, a protector of his crew. He was something more, something different. He carried the weight of a galaxy on his shoulders, the knowledge of a fragile peace, the responsibility of a future yet unwritten. The journey back to the Odyssey was fraught with tension. Alistair didn't know what he would find when he returned. Had the remaining crew survived? Had they managed to repair the ship? Or had they fallen victim to the HFY or the perils of space? He clung to the hope that Dr. Eris was still alive, that her brilliance and resilience had seen her through. As the escape pod docked with the Odyssey, Alistair felt a surge of relief. The ship was still functional, albeit barely. The emergency lights flickered, casting an eerie glow on the deserted corridors. But there was power, there was life. He made his way to the control room, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Dr. Eris there, hunched over a console, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widening in disbelief. Alistair. You're alive! A wave of emotion washed over him. He had made it. He had returned. He was home. He told her everything, about the HFY queens, about the human captives, about the fragile peace he had witnessed. Dr. Eris listened intently, her face a mixture of shock and fascination. She understood the significance of what he had told her, the implications for the future of humanity. They worked together, tirelessly, to repair the Odyssey, to restore its communication systems, to send a distress signal to Earth. The journey back was long and arduous, but they made it. They returned to Earth, carrying a message of warning, but also a message of hope. The world reacted with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The existence of the HFY, their advanced technology, their exploitation of humans, it was all too much to comprehend. Governments went into lockdown, militaries were mobilized, scientists scrambled to understand the HFY threat. But there was also a sense of hope, a belief that peace was possible. Alistair and Dr. Eris became reluctant heroes, their story a beacon of hope in a world facing an unknown future. But Alistair knew that the real work had just begun. The HFY queen who had shown him the vision, she was still out there, struggling to rebuild her society, to lead her people towards a peaceful future. He knew that he had to find a way to contact her, to offer his help, to forge a lasting alliance between humans and HFY. He worked with scientists, with linguists, with diplomats, trying to establish communication with the HFY. It was a slow, painstaking process, but eventually they succeeded. A channel was opened, a dialogue was established. Alistair spoke to the HFY queen, sharing his vision of a peaceful future, offering his assistance in rebuilding their society. The HFY queen responded, her voice filled with hope and gratitude. She told him about the challenges she faced, the internal strife within her race, the difficulty of changing the course of a civilization that had been built on exploitation and war. She needed his help, she needed his guidance, she needed his understanding. Alistair knew what he had to do. He had to return to the HFY ship, not as a prisoner, but as an ambassador, a bridge between two worlds. He knew it was dangerous, that he could be walking into a trap, but he also knew that it was the only way to secure a lasting peace. He returned to the HFY ship, accompanied by a team of scientists, diplomats, and linguists. They were greeted by the HFY queen, who welcomed them with open arms. She showed them the devastation caused by the internal conflict, the struggle to rebuild their society, the desperate need for resources and technology. Alistair and his team worked with the HFY, sharing their knowledge, their technology, their resources. They helped them rebuild their infrastructure, develop new sources of energy, establish a sustainable society. They taught them about human culture, about human values, about the importance of peace and cooperation. The HFY queen, inspired by Alistair's vision, worked tirelessly to change her people's mindset, to move them away from their destructive past and towards a future of peace and understanding. It was a long, difficult process, but slowly, gradually, things began to change. The HFY began to see humans not as a resource, but as partners, as equals. They began to learn from each other, to share their cultures, their knowledge, their experiences. A bond was formed, a connection that transcended species, a shared commitment to a peaceful future. Alistair became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of understanding and cooperation. He was no longer just a captain, or a prime breeder, or a savior. He was a bridge, a link between two worlds, a catalyst for change. Years passed, and the relationship between humans and KRYL flourished. They established trade routes, shared scientific discoveries, explored the galaxy together. They learned from each other, grew together, prospered together. The KRYL society was transformed, their culture reshaped by the influence of human values. They abandoned their warlike ways, embracing peace and cooperation. They became a beacon of hope in the galaxy, a testament to the power of change. Alistair, now an elder statesman, looked back on his life with a sense of fulfillment. He had played a role in shaping a peaceful future, a future where humans and KRYL coexisted in harmony. He had bridged the gap between two worlds, forging a lasting alliance that would benefit both species for generations to come. He had faced his fears, overcome unimaginable challenges, and made difficult choices. He had sacrificed his own comfort, his own desires, for the greater good. He had become a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of the human spirit. And as he looked towards the future, he knew that the journey was far from over. There were still challenges to overcome, conflicts to resolve, bridges to build. But he also knew that humans and KRYL, together, could face any challenge, overcome any obstacle, and build a brighter future for all. The universe was vast, full of wonders and dangers, but with understanding, cooperation, and a shared vision of peace, anything was possible. The story of humanity and the KRYL was a testament to that. It was a story of hope, a story of change, a story of the enduring power of the human spirit. And it was a story that would continue to unfold for generations to come.